Learning process. Learning. Learning is the act of acquiring new or modifying and reinforcing existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences, and may involve synthesizing different types of information. Learning produces changes in the student, and the changes produced are relatively permanent. Progress over time tends to follow learning curves. Learning is not compulsory. It is contextual. It does not happen all at once, but builds upon and is shaped by previous knowledge. Learning may be viewed as a process rather than a collection of factual and procedural knowledge. The learning process is composed of 4 steps: exposure, reflection, conceptualization, and experimentation. Each step is explained individually in the following sections. Let's unpack that. That is dense with information. And one more time, the is quite robust. Learning is the act of acquiring new or modifying and reinforcing existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences, and may involve synthesizing different types of information. So we are acquiring new knowledge, and based on the knowledge we're acquiring, we're modifying and reinforcing existing knowledge. And there's also our behavior, skills, values, or preferences may be shifted or changed a little bit based on the information. If you think about, here's a behavior. 2 boats are crossing in a crossing situation. You're a sailboat and you have a charter fishing boat that is just considered a power-driven vessel. Well, there might have been confusion in the rules. The sailing boat thinks they have right of way. The charter fishing vessel thinks they're a vessel engaged in fishing, but they're not, and they have right of way. What do? So you learn the rules of the road, your behavior shifts, and all the things you learn come into play in that situation. And there's, we might have to synthesize information. Based on what we learned, we can actually make more connections and create more information based on what we've learned. And then it all happens, so it's not compulsory. It doesn't just happen, it's contextual. It happens because of the context of what's around you. A good example is, a training course versus learning in the field. A lot of times people just go through the motions, take a training course, but the real learning happens in the field. The training kind of prepares you for what you're going to see, but you get in the field and it's contextual. Everything around you, you don't want to get hurt if you're in a dangerous situation. You're working on a boat dock and there's a lot of fork trucks and cars and cargo and all these things. There's a lot of context. You have to learn where to stand, learn what to do, and there's big consequences for not learning that material. And then it happens on a curve. Learning curves, you have some type of base, and then you start learning and it kind of gets faster. As you learn a little bit about it, you have more details you can find about it. Like when you go to Google search something, you don't even know what it is, and then you find its name. And then you Google search the name, and then the information comes faster, and there's more little bits of that information that you can take in. So it speeds up. But then once you get all the little bits, learn about them, there's more effort involved to get to the highest level. And I want to draw out a learning curve and kind of take a look at that. But let's unpack the rest of this. It's a process. It's viewed as a process rather than just a collection of facts. You memorize all these facts. Well, learning is actually a process that we go through, and we go exposure, reflection, conceptualization, and then experimentation with that. So it's this whole process we got going. So let's take a look at this learning curve because I find it fascinating. So we have, just your regular graph, and we have performance. Your performance with the information can go up, And then this is effort to gain the information. Goes this way. So you're going to start at some level, right? You have some type of proficiency level. You come into charting, for example, and you can do certain like add and subtract. You can do some multiplication. You have some understanding of these concepts, where an engineer will come into a charting class and understand all of this very well, and right away is going to try to like come up with new ways to get the same information. That's experimentation. That's like the highest level. But some people, they didn't quite pay attention or do well, or they weren't interested in academic learning. Like, let's say they barely made it past 10th grade and they went and got a job and started making money and did their thing, right? There's plenty of these people. But their math skills are weak. So their proficiency level to start is going to be lower. So right here we started our proficiency level, and as you gain, you start to gain an understanding and learn the tips and tricks and stuff, and it goes up a little faster, but then it starts to take more effort, and it kind of asymptotes. So we can look at this. I'm going to draw that into that different. A little too steep right there. So it's going, it gets a little harder, and it kind of starts to taper off. And what you get is up here is there's only so much you can learn. So this is, this would be considered like max performance with the information, right? But then down here we have this is essentially you're competent with the information. This is just competency. This is where you want to get. You have the information, you can use it, you're competent with the information. Right? So, and there's a point right around here where it's going to take more effort. So, rules of the road is a great example. You have the rules, you have the sounds, you have the lights, you have the day shapes, and it's all coming together. But it always goes in certain order. People get crossing situations and head-on and overtaking. Those come first, and then you start to get into the lights, and the lights are harder, but you're over here. You're learning a lot. You're learning sound, light, shapes right in here. But right in here, there's these nuances, like the vessels that give the same fog signal, whether underway or at anchor. A vessel restricted in their ability to maneuver, and a vessel engaged in fishing, whether underway or at anchor, gives the same sound signal as. So it starts to get into these very nuanced, and they're the last things, and they take a lot of effort to keep straight. Same with like bells and gongs for vessels over 100 meters of ground or vessels under 100 meters of ground. So this is like, you start to get more effort right before you get to this competency. And this is just a typical learning curve. This is where you start your proficiency level. You learn some of the terms and everything, and you start gaining faster. You get lots of momentum fast. You're going to hit this point where it takes more mental effort to get to the end. And this is really, these points right in here, this is really where an instructor is very valuable. A mentor, a guide, an instructor, a qualified instructor, they're going to come in handy here, because this is when the students are going to start to hit you with all these questions. Well, what about a vessel that is under 50 meters doing this, or over 50 meters, or they'll almost remember the lengths of the vessel, but not quite. There's all these cutoffs, like 12 meters. The stern light and masthead light can be combined, and it doesn't have to be on the center line, but above that it does. And then you have 20 meters. Vessels under 20 meters, sailing vessels, fishing vessels, can't impede a vessel in a narrow channel that can only operate within that channel. And then there's 50 meters, you get a second masthead light, and 100 meters, you get your deck lights have to be on, your working lights, your deck lights have to be on when you're anchored. and the anchor lights change. So these are the nuanced details where the instructor really comes in, and it's the most effort to learn this stuff. But once you get that stuff straight, now you have competence. And then no matter how much you study, there's only so many rules of the road in the book. You know, you can memorize that whole book, and now you're coming up to the max. So this is a cool learning curve. And now let's go ahead and take a look at exposure, reflection, conceptualization, and experimentation. Exposure. The first step of the learning process is exposure to the learning material. Through lectures, videos, and readings, the students are exposed to the material they need to understand and remember. The manner in which students are exposed to material is important to their later success with the material. The material should be presented in a clear, effective manner with an end goal and learning objectives set forth at the beginning of the topic. Once a student is exposed to the material, they can make progress toward reflection, which helps the learning material make sense. So exposure is simply, let's use rules of the road for example again. You expose the student to Rule 13, overtaking situation, and present the situation, and they say, oh, okay, that's an overtaking situation. And now they can move on to the second step, which is reflection. Reflection is the second step in the learning process. Students reflect on the material and process it so it makes sense. When students are able to make strong associations that relate the learning material to themselves and the world around them, the knowledge will remain with them forever. Associations and mnemonic rhymes are powerful tools to help with reflection process. A well-known mnemonic rhyme for recalling the proper side to keep a red buoy on when returning to port from sea is red right returning. Relating different topics to students, individuals, relating different topics to students' individual experiences give them a foot forward in reflection process and bring them closer to clarification of the material. Right? So, good. So what you want to do is relate material to the student so they can reflect on it. So you want them to think, we'll use the overtaking situation again. They learn about the situation, and then if they think about that time they were in a narrow channel that was busy and a vessel tried to overtake them when oncoming vessels were coming at them, and it created a horrible situation. So they can associate it with that and say, oh, I could see why no one impedes an overtaking vessel. There's no reason to go faster than someone and overtake them when it can create a bad situation. So you're not allowed to impede that overtaken vessel until you're well past and clear of that vessel. You know, you have to, there's no impeding the overtaking. It says, notwithstanding anything from Rule 3 to Rule 18, no one impedes an overtaking vessel. That's a big deal. It's something you don't do. If you're going to overtake someone, you can't impede them. So we make these associations. They think, I remember a time when that caused an issue. That is why this rule is written like that, and that is why I do not overtake an overtaking. That's why I do not overtake a vessel if it will impede that vessel or cause a close quarter situation somewhere. Conceptualization. Conceptualizing is the process by which students clarify concepts with words and examples to arrive at a precise definition. Let's take a look at an example that comes up in Rules of the Road module. A crossing situation is defined in the Rules of the Road book. A crossing situation then has rules, boundaries, and limitations associated with it. Students must conceptualize this situation through lectures, videos, subsequent conversations, and clarification of the situation for it to really sink in and make sense. When concepts become clearly defined by students, they can start to experiment with the knowledge. And the last section is experimentation. Experimentation is testing new concepts. Practice problem sets and online quizzes allow the students to experiment with the concepts presented to them by the QI in the online classroom. Let's use the example of overtaking situation from the Rules of the Road module. Now that the student has the concept of overtaking situation in their mind, they can experiment with it by asking the QI questions. The QI can then answer the questions and subsequent questions that may arise, which helps further define and solidify the concept they are refining. So we have the definition of learning, right? The definition of learning. Learning is the act of acquiring new or modifying and reinforcing existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences, and may involve synthesizing different types of information. Then you have exposure. It's the first step of the learning process, and it's just being exposed to material. Then you have reflection. It's the second step of the learning process, and it's students making strong associations that relate the learning material to themselves and the world around them. And then conceptualization is the process by which students clarify concepts with words and examples to arrive at a precise decision, a precise definition. And then you have experimentation. It's testing new concepts. So you get in there and you quiz yourself on them and you test the concepts and push the boundaries of the concepts and just kind of experiment with those concepts.